Welcome back, everyone. It is Eric from Rare Candy, and today we finally have our next look at some more of these ancient and future cards. They're going to be coming out in this fall's Paradox Rift set. So of course, we did see our first look at these back at the World Championships this year, but I think up until now, a lot of the trainer cards and the engines that would support these mechanics were still shrouded in a little bit of mystery. But over in Japan, we just saw a big blowout of information on some of these trainer cards, in addition to a look at some more of these ancient and future Pokemon as well. Now, there definitely could be more of these that we don't yet know about, but I think based on these reveals today, we finally have a pretty good idea of the power level of these new ancient and future cards. But with that being said, guys, I'm going to stop rambling, just smack that like button to feed that YouTube algorithm. Let's jump in and check out some of these new card reveals. So I think we're going to start things off with the new trainer cards, since these do sort of recontextualize how we think about these new Pokemon that we're getting revealed as well. But up first, we have the Future Boost Energy Capsule, which was a card that actually did get sort of partially revealed lately. But of course, there is a Future Energy Capsule and an Ancient one, as you would imagine. And I gotta say, I just love the card templates for these. Like, I love the sort of futuristic, like sci-fi, like digital look on this half of the card. Very cool. But for this one, the future Pokemon this card is attached to has no retreat cost, and the attacks it uses do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So this card's actually pretty nuts. It's literally Floatstone plus a Muscle Band shoved into one card, both of which were fantastic tools back during the XY era. So the fact that we have both of those now is pretty crazy, even though they are just limited to these future Pokemon. So obviously we can use this with any of the future Pokemon that are coming out, but I think the big one, based on what we've seen, has to be the Iron Valiant, or whatever the Mecha Gardevoir Gallade thing is. This card, I think, disproportionately does benefit that, because that card hits for 200. This takes you up to 220, which allows you to knock out basic Pokemon EX. And basic Pokemon V, of course, too. And also does give you free retreat, which is important because Iron Valiant, or I think it's actually in these reveals. Let me just check what it's called real quick. Okay, yeah, the Iron Valiant here. So the reason it's good with this card is because with this ability, once during your turn, when you move from your bench to the active spot, you can put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So the idea when we slap this thing down is we can just maneuver this thing out of the active, get a bunch of damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon. So this card definitely seems like the biggest sort of partner for the Boost Energy Capsule. But of course, we can play it with any of these different future Pokemon. But then the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule also has its own unique effect. So ancient Pokemon get 60 extra HP, and they recover from special conditions and can't be affected by special conditions. So I think at a glance, I don't know, the future one just as a knee-jerk reaction feels a little bit better. But I guess the big upside to this one is that since these Pokemon are all basics, the 60 extra HP does effectively turn them into like kind of like stage ones in terms of how tanky they are. And they might actually be able to sustain a hit instead of just getting one shot. And I'm pretty sure the like Salamence looking dude damages himself, so maybe this is pretty relevant for that too. Let me just brush up on my knowledge of this card here. Yeah, so the first attack does do 200 to itself, so you already can survive a hit, but you know, if you're doing damage to yourself, the extra 60 HP definitely isn't going to be awful, I suppose. Though I guess we could play it with Screamtail and Gardevoir potentially, because with 60 extra HP, you can actually stack a ton of damage counters on this guy now. So if you have now 150 HP, that's 7 energies you can accelerate with Gardevoir. So that's 14 damage counters, right? So yeah, that's actually pretty sick math for the Screamtail. Now having to play like a one of tool could be tricky to find on the turn that you want it, though there are things like Town Store that you could play as like your stadium of choice maybe. So I don't know, this seems kind of cool. I don't know if this is just getting a little bit gimmicky, but this is definitely a possibility for Gardevoir decks, absolutely. But back to our new reveals. Up next, we have Professor Sada's Determination. You choose up to 2 of your ancient Pokemon and attach 1 basic energy from your discard pile to each of them, then draw 3 cards. So this is kind of crazy. It's like double Melanie in a way. It's like Melanie plus 1 more attachment to a different Pokemon. Think of it that way. So yeah, this card is definitely solid. Absolutely. So between this card and Dark Patch, a couple of the Dark Ancient Pokemon actually could be pretty easy to get powered up throughout the course of the game. Okay, up next from there, we have Earth Vessel, which is kind of a reprint, emphasis on the kind of part. It's very similar to Professor's Letter, but you discard energy from your hand in order to use this card, then search your deck for up to 2 basic energies, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So again, kind of like Professor's Letter, but you now have to discard a card. This definitely has perfect synergy with the Sada's Determination, since you can chuck away energies, accelerate them back as well. Though also, I will point out with the Sada's Determination, we also can use Radiant Greninja. So that definitely seems like probably our Radiant Pokemon of choice based on what we've seen so far. I mean, you can even discard energy, grab energy, and use concealed cards to keep chucking them away if you really want to. So of course, we have the other Professor getting its own new card. We have Professor Turo's Scenario. You put 1 card into your hand, but discard all cards attached to that Pokemon. So this is basically kind of a reprint of AZ back from the XY era, I believe it was. And this card actually could see play both in the future decks, maybe to recycle Iron Valiant's ability, get multiple uses out of it, but also too, it's just a good healing card in non-future decks. So think of something like a Mew VMAX, just as an easy example. If your opponent swings onto your Mew, well, now you can use this to pick up the damaged Mew, re-evolve. You will have to find another double turbo to attack for turn, but this does give you a sort of Sharon's Care sort of effect for your non-colorless decks out there. But we also do have an item card exclusive for future Pokemon as well. So you discard a card from your hand in order to use this card, then search your deck for up to 2 future Pokemon cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So if I do understand this card correctly, it does seem like it is only limited to Pokemon specifically. Like, I don't think this wording is like Pokemon cards as in just the generic term for cards within the Pokemon card game. I think they do specifically mean to actual Pokemon cards. So you're not going to be able to grab something like Professor Turo and like an Iron Valiant or something like that. It is only going to be limited to the Pokemon themselves, but that's not even that bad of an effect. I mean, if we compare this to Ultra Ball, you have to get rid of 2 cards with Ultra Ball and only get rid of 1, whereas this is the inverse. This is still a really good searching effect. Assuming, of course, your deck is built around a lot of these future cards. So with something like Iron Valiant, where there is a good chance you might be playing multiple copies, this can just grab you a couple of them, especially if you are just trying to cycle through their different abilities to keep racking up damage counters in a given turn. But no doubt this card would have been a little bit better had you been able to grab things like future supporters or future tools and stuff like that as well. And we have a few non-ancient and future trainer cards here too. We have Mela up first. So you can only play this card if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn, but you attach a basic fire from discard to one of your Pokemon and then draw until you have 6 cards. So again, we have another sort of Melanie-ish effect here. Now, that being said, I think this card definitely could be good, especially even in like single prize fire decks out there. If we ever do see any of those catch on, just because you're going to have far more opportunities to play a card like this throughout the course of a game. Whereas if you're just playing like big hulking 2 and 3 prize Pokemon, you know, you're really only going to have like 2 chances in a game to use something like this. But nevertheless, I think this card is definitely really solid. We still have Luminion as well. So even in these multi-prize decks that want fire energy, we can search this out on the turn that we want it. And there's a chance this card also could start enabling more like 3 energy fire attackers out there, because one of the issues that fire Pokemon face right now is that Magma Basin, while good, it's really only good for attackers that need like a single fire energy to attack with, or like 2 max, because with your attachment and Magma Basin, you're still coming up a little bit shy of getting an attack off with something like an Arcanine EX, just as like an easy example. So whereas something like this could maybe make those styles of decks with these, you know, 3 or maybe even 4 like fire energy costs a little bit more manageable. And for the other non-ancient and future supporter, we have Tulip, where you get up to 4 of any combination of psychic Pokemon and psychic basic energy cards from your discard pile and put them into your hand. So I definitely feel a little bit conflicted about this card. It definitely makes a lot of sense, both in Gardevoir EX as well as Shadow Rider decks. But, you know, we do have Super Odd now, and a lot of the times you'd rather just play Super Odd than Iono in the same turn. Because really you're only getting like 1 extra card, and I don't know if that's worth it to sacrifice not playing Boss or Iona or even like Research in the same turn. Now, of course, these do go to your hand, which is definitely a big upgrade of just going into your deck. And we have seen, even Gardevoir play Clara in the past. So it's not unreasonable to, I think, play something like Tulip. Now, something to keep in mind too is we do have the new Xatu that's going to be coming out. So this could maybe make sense in some sort of like Iron Valiant Xatu deck out there. I think Super Odd's going to be preferable for most decks out there, but I think Tulip is still strong enough to at least make you consider which one you want to play. But like I said, guys, we also do have a few new Pokemon as well. Up first, we have Iron Hands EX, one of these future Pokemon. I think the attack here that really catches my interest is definitely the second one. It does cost a massive lightning in 3 colors, but it does 120, and if your opponent's active is knocked out by damage from this attack, take 1 additional prize card. And getting an extra prize card, that's pretty huge. We've seen people play things like Stoutland V in the past. Of course, Arceus Dialga-Palkia GX, which was, definitely a menace during its time. So I really don't want people to sleep on how good this effect actually is. But the big question really though is like, how do we get this thing powered up? Because 4 energy is a lot and 120 damage isn't that much. I think naturally you could think of something like Miraidon, definitely makes some sense. Though it does sort of require that you have like 2 Flaffies, an attachment, and 1 energy off generator or some combination of those, which is a lot to ask for because you really don't want to bench this preemptively, because if your opponent does see it coming, there is a chance that they can play around it. This would probably be like sort of a closer in the deck, I would imagine, especially against certain matchups with low HP Pokemon like Lost Box or even Gardevoir decks. But speaking of Lost Box, I think that's actually one of the other decks that really could look at something like this. Lost Box is really one of the few decks that can get around this attack cost by just playing 2 Mirage Gates in the same turn, and you're already playing Lightning Energy more than likely since you're playing Dragonite and Raikou V. We do have the new Jirachi that just got revealed that could maybe make a resurgence of other single prize decks out there, or, low HP decks like, the United Wings deck and stuff like that. And if those types of decks do start to catch on a bit more after Jirachi comes out, a card like Iron Hands definitely could be good in those situations for sure. So we have Slitherwing. I don't think this card is particularly great, but we'll at least go over it. So for 2 fire, you do 120, and this Pokemon takes 90 damage, and your opponent's active is burned. So for 2 fighting, you're essentially doing 140. You could think of it that way. Not an awful amount of damage, guys, and it does knock out some fighting weak Pokemon out there. Like, you're not knocking out Arceus unless you have something like a Choice Belt. But against things like Miraidon, you are going to be making quick work of them. But if we ever see some sort of like ancient toolbox deck, this could be a consideration just to give you some coverage against those fighting weak decks out there. But speaking of fighting ancient Pokemon, we do have Sandy Shocks up next. And its ability is pretty cool. It can be used once during your turn, but only if your opponent has 4 or fewer prize cards remaining. You attach a basic fighting from your discard to this Pokemon. So if we play the new Sada supporter card, this ability, and then an attachment for turn, we can get this guy powered up in a single turn, and it does hit for 200, and this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. So again, if there is some sort of hypothetical ancient box deck, this guy might be a better potential fighting counter than something like the Slitherwing. Again, unless of course you are playing Choice Belt in your deck, Slitherwing is probably a little bit better in that instance. But if you are playing the ancient like capsule instead of any damage modifying tools, this guy definitely could be a little bit more reliable. In terms of other uses for this ability, we could even see like a Galarian Moltres V sort of application for this card, where you're charging this guy up and doing like energy switch shenanigans. And for our last new card reveal, we have Iron, Jugulus? I don't know how we pronounce this one, guys. Definitely feel free to correct me in the comments, but yeah, very weird name for Mecha Hydreigon here. And I'm not sure what this Pokemon's typing is in the games, but color seems really weird. Like, this looks like it'd be a metal or dragon Pokemon, so kind of weird. But anyways, let's take a look at this card. So for 3 colorless, this 50 to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon that already have any damage counters on them. And then for 5 colorless, does 150. But of course, if you have the boost energy capsule attached, it's only 3 colorless instead. But I can't say I'm the biggest fan of this card just because its damage output, just to begin with, isn't that great. but because it's colorless, it doesn't really hit anything for weakness here. We maybe could play it in something like colorless Lugia just to give your deck some sort of sniping effect, since I don't think Lugia has any like great snipers right now. Well, I guess the thought is because it's a future Pokemon, they probably want you to play it with Iron Valiant. So that starts to make a little bit more sense, I guess, because Iron Valiant's going to be setting up damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon, so you can come in and just sort of clean up those KOs at some point. I think the only issue at that point is trying to figure out how you actually power this guy up, because in the case of Iron Valiant, my knee-jerk reaction is you're probably playing Xatu, just because you don't really have the bench space for like a bunch of comfies, but just overall doesn't seem like too crazy broken to me. But that's going to round out all of our new card reveals for today, guys. And I will say, I think both these new mechanics are looking really promising. I think they're good, but they're not like broken, which I'm happy about because these are all basic Pokemon. I don't want basic Pokemon just running the format. I think that's always when this game is at its worst. So the fact that these cards seem viable, but not overpowered, I think is actually really nice. But I'm definitely curious what you guys are thinking. Are you going to be Team Ancient Pokemon or Team Future Pokemon? Let me know which of these groups of cards has you more excited. Me personally, I definitely like the energy acceleration from the Professor Sada, but I really like the whole damage placing with Iron Valiant. That just seems kind of fun to me. So I'm unsure of where I'm going to land just yet, but both of these new mechanics are certainly looking promising. But of course, guys, if you did enjoy today's content, remember to leave a like on the video. And if you're feeling a little bit extra generous, you can always become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or pick up some merch at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.